All right, folks, it's a Wednesday, October the 11th, and it is definitely time for World Edition, where we talk about a number of issues going on in the world, things that are happening in the news, and we discuss that as well as other things that are happening as well. But we've definitely got a special guest that's going to be talking about leadership, and we do know that leadership is a very important conversation as well. But before we get to that, let's just talk about a couple of things that are happening in the world. It definitely looks like the Israeli Hamas war is definitely still continuing, and there is now a death toll that is topping 2,200, including 14 U.S. citizens, as Biden has confirmed that there are American hostages. And Israel is intensifying retaliation after the Hamas terror attack, and we're definitely seeing that. And definitely, Biden, like I said, has admitted that there are Americans being held hostage by Hamas, and the EU chief is saying that the Hamas attack is an act of war that reflects an ancient evil. And definitely, Israel is responding to attacks from another side of their border because apparently there are Hezbollah attacks from Lebanon, and Israel is deploying tens of thousands to the northern border. And there's fear of escalations arising as Israel and Hezbollah exchange fire as well. So that is part of what is going on there. And of course, there are attempts to rescue some of those hostages as well. And in other news, Mexico is facing flooding after Hurricane Lydia and Tropical Storm Max are battering their coast. So that is something that is going on as Lydia made landfall as a Category 4 hurricane with 140-mile winds that were coming into parts of Mexico. And Elon Musk is in the news again. This time he is getting a warning from the EU because apparently Musk was given 24 hours to address graphic images of the Hamas attack, and there is conversations around disinformation that is spreading on the Israeli Hamas war across social media. And he was given Elon Musk, that is, 24 hours to respond about the misinformation and violence that was there on X, formerly Twitter. And definitely that is something that is going on in the news as well. So we're definitely seeing that. And in the Baltic gas pipeline leak was likely caused by external activity, according to Finland's president. And there is definitely natural gas prices pulled back following a surge. But Estonia is launching an investigation into the underwater communications cable malfunction. So NATO will respond, it's been said, if the Baltic Sea pipeline damage was deliberate, according to an alliance chief, and all in that space. So we're definitely seeing that being a news item as well. And there was the meeting between Schumer and the leader of China. So China is moves to condemn attacks after Schumer's pressure. So that is something that going on as well. Schumer met with China's Xi and expressed disappointment that Beijing hadn't condemned Hamas, but it does look like that may be changing as of this particular point and all along those lines. So that is definitely something that we are seeing as well. Um, Definitely, we're seeing some splits over the reaction as well because Turkey's Erdogan is calling Israeli response to Hamas in Gaza a massacre, and Turkey's Erdogan says U.S. sending aircraft carriers closer to Israel is definitely fueling, I guess, some of the fire, as he was saying that was um, part of the what he is calling a massacre and all in that space. And definitely we'll see how folks react to that. And it looks like in the UK labor leader is promising a decade of national renewal in a disrupted conference speech. So there was disrupted, but he is promising that there will be some unity in that area and all along those lines. So that is something that we are seeing in the news as well. I would tell you something that surprised me that I saw in the news, and I'd be interested to hear people's thoughts about that. It even comes down to leadership, which I'm here to talk to Mr. Howard about very shortly and all along those lines. But I did not realize, because it paints itself as a neutral country, that apparently there is a gang problem in Sweden. But I was seeing that in some of the news that I was reading earlier on yesterday, and there's some efforts to deal with that as well. So it doesn't look like gang problems are just a problem here in Durham, North Carolina, where I am based, but they're a problem throughout the world. Because I know there is some activities that were going on in Haiti as well, and there was actually some efforts to try to curb that gang violence as well. But definitely, it does seem like this is an issue that is a global issue and all along those lines. And in Guatemala, Guatemala is paralyzed as pro democracy protests run into the second week, and Guatemalan police are clearing protesters' roadblocks after the president threatens a crackdown, and definitely threatening a crackdown in that space and all along those lines. So definitely that is something that we are seeing in the world as well. Let me get to some of the things that are happening in the United States before I bring in Mr. Howard and we talk about leadership and some of the things that are going on even in the space of leadership, because definitely that is something that comes up even in the time of voting. And I know that we had voting here in Durham. We narrowed our candidates down in terms of 2 for mayor, and I think we narrowed it down to about 6 for city council, and those 6 will be running for 3 seats and all along those lines. But in terms of the mayor's race, it'll be down to Leonardo Williams and Senator Mike Woodard. So one of those, a current city councilman, and the other, a past city councilman who now serves in the Senate, will be our next mayor and all along those lines, because they trimmed it down from, I think it was about 8 or something like that candidates down to about the 2 that are going to be facing off against each other in the next race. And speaking of races, Supreme Court is set to weigh on the lines of South Carolina's congressional district in that particular case, and South Carolina's redistricting case could add Democratic House seats. So we're going to see whether that comes about, and they're going to be reviewing whether the new map discriminated against Black voters and all in that space. And the Republicans are to meet to nominate a speaker. That sounds like a conversation around leadership as well. So Steve Scalise and Jim Jordan are vying to become the House Speaker, with GOP set to vote on the candidate. So it'll be interesting to see who gets that position. Apparently, Louisiana's first Garrett Graves, who is definitely a Louisiana first, and all along those lines, is putting Louisiana first and backing Steve Scalise for the speaker. So there is also a growing backlash over Harvard students' pro-Palestine letter and all in that space. So we're seeing how these situations, even in the world, can impact academia as well. So that is something that is going on. And of course, there are various lawsuits as well. And Utah's Attorney General spokesman is trying to shut down 2 news questions about lawsuit against our founder, Tim Ballard. So Tim Ballard of Sound of Freedom fame was accused of sexual misconduct. And of course, he's the one that inspired that particular movie. And apparently that case is going on while Representative George Santos is facing 10 new federal charges, including allegations of stealing his donor's identity, running up fraudulent credit card charges, and there might be some other charges that are in there as well. So definitely that is something that we are seeing, and definitely, Trump is still in the news as well. So that is something that we are also seeing in this particular case, as at least 25 Trump election case witnesses withheld information based on attorney-client privilege, according to prosecutors. And ex-prosecutors say Jack Smith hasn't just taken off the gloves with his new Trump move. So we're going to see how this all plays out on the political landscape and all in that space. And Carrie Lake has announced that she is going to be running for Arizona Senate seat. So she officially started her campaign for the U.S. Senate and all in that space. And there was an Atlanta police officer who was fired after using a stun gun on a church deacon who died, and all in that space. And there is a scrutiny of Arkansas governor's $19,000 lectern and all in that space. So apparently there's a $19,000 lectern that Governor Sarah Huckabee Sanders has, and it has drawn scrutiny and all along those lines. So that's just some of the news that I am finding and all along those lines, but we'll get ready to bring in our guest and see what he's got to say about leadership and what's going on in the leadership space and all in that kind of way. So I'm going to bring in Stephen Howard, who is I love the name of his book and everything, because apparently he found a way to mix in some different words and all along those lines and created his own version of what leadership is and all in that space. So we are definitely in a new time, both on the world scene as well as previously with the pandemic and all along those lines. So if you can just tell folks a little bit about Hominy. I think that's the way to pronounce it, but if I mispronounce it, please correct me. And you are saying that leadership is changing in the post-pandemic world, and I can definitely see that, because even in some of the corporate situations, they are having to decide whether they are going to let people come back to work or whether they're going to let them stay at home, since many of us, myself included, got used to doing some of our work from home. Like if you work at a cultural arts center, you can't do that much from home, because you have to be there in the physical place. And that is one of the jobs that I have. But I have also worked in a testing company, and that was definitely done more from home over the last 2 or 3 years, because that is something you can do from the computer and from home. And I know that some companies have been saying, come on back to work. And some of the workers are going like, no, I'm kind of comfortable here at home and able to do my work from the home front and all along those lines. So I imagine that's one of the challenges that leadership faces.
It is definitely one of the challenges. And I think not so much that companies want to let people come back to work. I think companies are trying to mandate that people come back to work. And in many cases, the workforce is saying, no, thank you. And I don't think it's so much the work environment that's impacting this, in particularly in certain areas of the country, or even certain areas of the world. It's the commuting time. Who wants to spend 45, 55, 75 minutes each way commuting to get to a physical space where you end up doing individual work anyway? You sit at a cubicle, you have your head down on your computer, and once in a while you might go into a meeting room. So a lot of people are not comfortable with doing that anymore. So a lot of things changing, Mark.
Yeah, definitely a lot of things that are changing and everything. I know one of the things that you said is that leaders need to understand and change their mindset about what it means to be a leader today. So I guess that's one of the questions I've got for you is, what is an effective leader, and how are effective leaders determined? Because I know that you've definitely been involved in this leadership space for a while. And I oftentimes hear people talk about leadership, and sometimes I don't know that we always understand what an effective leader is.
Well, thanks, Mark. And people have been saying effective leaders. I think this probably sums up how it's changed. You go back to the early 2000s, late 1990s, an effective leader was somebody, and you would see this in all the literature, the Business Weeks, the Fortune, the Forbes, and they would say a great leader is someone who gets the most out of their people. Well, I would argue today that that is no longer the case, that effective leader today is the one who puts the most into their people and then reaps the rewards and benefits for doing so. And those rewards and benefits are higher employee engagement, productivity, most importantly, creativity, innovation, and collaboration. And these are the things that businesses need to propel themselves forward in the coming years.
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense. Everything. I know one of the things you talk about is this notion of a people-centric leader, and that sounds like something that you're talking about even in this sense. So I do know that for a while, a lot of times people were, when they thought about leadership, they were thinking about the bottom dollar. I'm not dismissing the bottom dollar, but it sounds like you are thinking that leaders need to have more of a people-centric focus while they can still go after those big dollars and all along those lines. Is that a fair statement, or is that not a fair statement?
No, it's very fair, Mark. It's a great summation. The fact really is simple, is that leaders who focus only on results, and it's not just the dollars. It could be, if you're in manufacturing, it could be just focusing on quality control. If you're in some other area, it could be focusing just on productivity. So it's the results, but they all lead to the bottom line. But if you, as a leader today, only focus on results, you're going to burn your people out, number one. Number two, they're going to get frustrated. They're going to leave. And it's very hard to grow your business, your department, your unit, whatever it is, if one of your major expenses in time allocations is to recruit, onboard, hire, and train people who are replacing those who quit. And so you need to turn that around. And the interesting thing is, Mark, there's so much research that shows if you focus on people, particularly developing your people, empowering your people, you get the results that you want. And you get sustainable results. And your bottom line actually goes up because you don't have all those costs associated with employee turnover, with the lost productivity when people leave. And then, as I mentioned, all that cost of recruiting and onboarding and hiring and training new people.
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense. Now I know that there have been multiple. The writers just came off of a strike recently in Hollywood, from my understanding and everything. But there are transit workers in Philadelphia. There's definitely the workers that are in the automobile industry, primarily around Michigan and all of that area, that
Mhm.
are on strike. And there are a number of other strikes that have taken place. We even had a sanitation strike here in Durham, North Carolina, and all along those lines. And part of the conversation is around AI and new technology, because a lot of people are very big on innovation, and I definitely think that innovation is important in the 21st century. But how much of that conversation do you feel leaders need to be addressing as well? Because it seems like this is becoming more of a trend where folks are concerned that AI might be coming after their jobs or taking their jobs, and I guess the leaders have to have some responsibility in alleviating some of that fear from their employees.
I think they do, but like every new technology, the computers, people lost work because computers replaced them. Robots have replaced workers in the factory lines. People are pretty resilient; they'll adapt. I think in the writers' strike in Hollywood, it was also more of a concern about copyright issues. I think it was more a concern about getting paid for the new streaming issues, or streaming channels that are available instead of under the old contracts. It was, they were paid on the cinema releases and major like broadcast network releases and things like that. I think you sum all that up, but particularly in the one you didn't mention, Mark, is Kaiser Permanente,
Right.
the nurses going on strike, and that relates right back to my earlier comment about burnout. I mean, there's insufficient staff, and the nurses are having to work longer shifts and longer hours and do more work, and they're getting burned out. And that's happening in so many other industries. I would say to the leaders out there, organizations, that this summer should be a wake up call. Last summer was a wake up call in terms of the great resignation, and understanding that people are not going to put up bullying bosses. People are going to leave when the work life harmony is not in balance. This year's wake up call is understanding, quite frankly, that the war for talent is over and talent has won. The workers are now in charge. They have a lot more power than they've had in the past. And combining those two things, what's happening is something people are calling resenteeism. And that is those who don't leave the organization are being resentful. Those who don't feel they can leave, that they can find other opportunities, for whatever reason, they feel locked into working for the companies that they're in. They're now resentful because they're having to take on more work. They're having to put up with the bosses who don't respect them, that don't trust them, that don't empower them, that don't develop them. And so we've gone from a concept called presenteeism several years ago, which basically is presenteeism, where people just show up at work. I show up, do my job 9 to 5. I'm not doing anything more than asked. I'll take my paycheck and I'll go home, and I'm just going to be present. Now, resenteeism is even worse because I resent the fact that I'm here in this facility. I resent the fact that I have to work for this company. I'm angry about it, and I'm no longer engaged. I'm not going to be productive. I'm just going to do even the barest minimum that I have to make sure I get paid every 2 weeks.
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense. I know that you also talk in some of your leadership books about something that I know that I am guilty of. I know that many people here on this network are guilty of as well. And sometimes it works, sometimes it doesn't. But you say that it can have some perils as well. And that is that whole notion of multitasking, trying to do your, maybe doing your laundry at the same time that you're doing your work, or doing a number of other things that can be considered multitasking. And we definitely saw a lot of that during the pandemic, because people were trying to balance various things while they were also doing their work as well. So I was wondering if you could talk about some of those perils and how it can even impact brain health, which is very important as well.
Yeah, thanks, Mark. That goes to one of my earlier books about decision making, and the research is very clear. And let me clarify for your audience: the kind of multitasking I'm talking about is cognitive multitasking. Look, any of us can watch a TV show or a movie and eat our dinner, or as you say, I can have a laundry going on in the background, and I can still be working on one of my books. But it's the cognitive thinking. It's trying to do two things at one time. It's like for those, like anybody in the audience right now who's listening to us, but also checking their email. The brain can't concept both of those, and they're going to miss part of what I say or part of what you say, or they're going to misinterpret the email if they're starting to focus on what you and I are talking about, and they're going to respond maybe the wrong way because they've misinterpreted the email. So cognitive multitasking is what's really bad for the brain, and particularly long term. And I worry for our younger generation, our millennials and younger than the millennials, because they are multitasking all the time. And what's going to happen, research shows, is that they're training their brains not to be able to focus. And the inability to focus is one of the early indicators of dementia and Alzheimer's disease. So we're going to have generations who are training their brains not in a healthy way. So I'll leave you with a comment. I didn't create it. It comes from Sandra Cohen Burton, I think her name is. She created the Brain Trust Institute in Dallas, Texas. But her comment is very simple, that multitasking is as toxic for our brains as smoking is for our lungs. I'll just leave that thought.
Well, that's a deep thought and everything along those lines. One of the other things that I'm going to bring in some of the other panelists as well that I know has been talked about within leadership, even on the national level and everything, is this notion, and you kind of alluded to it in that comment and everything, that we are not doing enough to groom our young leaders. I mean, that's part of the conversation, even with what's going on in our current political landscape. But like I said, in the mayor's race, we have somebody that is a older candidate. I think Mike Woodard may be somewhere around his 60s, but he's nowhere near the president's age or anything along those lines. I think that Leonardo is probably in his 30s or 40s, so he's definitely a young leader. But definitely on our national level, we are seeing a lot of the old leaders stay in leadership for a number of years, and some people are wanting them to groom new, younger leaders and all along those lines. So I just wanted your thoughts about that. If we are doing enough on both a corporate level or even a political level to groom our young people to take over in leadership roles.
No, we're not. And I advocate in my book, Human Leadership, that people development is your number one responsibility as a leader. I mean, your role as a leader in organizations, profit, nonprofit, even government organization, is to develop more leaders, not more followers. On the political front, I think it's even more of a disaster. We've got a very small, eclectic group of elderly leaders who are not training people, or not helping the younger generation understand what leadership is all about. So we're setting ourselves up for some pretty tough times, I think, both in the political world and in the corporate world.
No, I definitely agree with you on that and everything. Like I said, Gary, to bring the other folks up and all along those lines. But I was going to ask you, what is Hominy? Because you definitely mentioned that and all along those lines. So I'd love to hear your thought as to what that actually means and all in that space. And like I said, I will bring up Nick, who is one of the founders, as well as Jacoby, who is in the gaming industry and all along those lines. But what is your thoughts around what Hominy is? Because that is definitely one of the books, and you have written several books. I'm going like, this man writes more books than Isaac Asimov did during his science fiction era and all along those lines. So I was quite impressed with the amount of books that you had put out in your lane.
Well, thank you, Mark. I created the word. I pronounce it humany, and the reason is that it's a combination of human, humanity, and harmony. So I pronounce it humany. It's a concept I came up with as I was thinking about how leadership needed to change coming out of the pandemic, how, using a phrase you used earlier, how leaders need to become more people-centric first. And the reason for this is very simple. The concept in the 1980s, 90s, early 2000s was all about, as leaders, we manage people. Well, I think that's incorrect. Nobody wakes up in the morning today and wants to be managed. And certainly no one wakes up and wants to be micromanaged by their boss. People want to be led. They want to be empowered. They want to be trusted. And so my message to leaders in the book is very simple. You manage things, policies, procedures, projects, but you lead people. And if you change your mindset around that, then I'm not here to manage you. I'm here to lead you. That mindset is so different. It says, I'm going to help develop you. I'm going to help coach you. I'm going to mentor you. I'm going to put you in the right direction. I'm going to allow you to make mistakes. Not mistakes that are, make the company go bankrupt, but I'm going to allow you to make mistakes and learn from those mistakes. I'm going to create an environment where it's okay to make mistakes and learn from it. And it's okay to express your views, even though your views might be different than mine. Your recommendations might be different. So that's psychologically safe environment. So all that encapsulates what I call humanity leadership, and I think is a better way to lead going into the future as we come out of the pandemic and lead our organizations for the next couple of decades.
And along those same lines, I know that one of the other things you talk about quite often, and I don't know that we do enough spending dealing with it. I mean, I do sometimes some word puzzles that hopefully are helping my brain health and all along those lines. But I was just wondering, is this something that we are doing enough of? Because I know one of the things that Nick talks about quite often is what we are not teaching in our school systems, whether that is fiscal literacy, whether that is the budget, whether that is a number of other things. So I was just wondering your thoughts as to whether we are doing enough to actually develop good leaders and even develop our brains to their maximum in the school system or just in life in general, and do things like word puzzles help and all along those lines. Because I said I did some earlier today and everything, and sometimes they can be helpful in my mind, but maybe they're not as helpful as I think they are.
Well, I think teachers do a great job overall of helping develop young people's minds. I think, unfortunately, when we get into university or into the workforce, we do a sad job of not developing people's minds, of hurting people's minds, and burnout and multitasking, things like that damage the long-term brain health of people. And that's why we're seeing, there's a prediction by the American Medical Association that dementia and Alzheimer's disease in this country will grow by 67% between 2020 and 2030. And that by 2030, we'll have 10 million Americans having dementia, Alzheimer's disease, or stroke that they're battling with. There's no excuse for that, because it's a lifestyle disease. It's what we do to our brains in our 30s and 40s. It's what we do to our bodies in our 30s and 40s. Not exercising, eating too much, being stressed, having high blood pressure. All those things are what leads to Alzheimer's and dementia. So I think we develop our brains. I give teachers great credit for that. I think they do a great job of that overall. But I think then when we put people in the workplace, we don't continue that development.
Okay, that makes sense. What do you think are some of the critical areas and problems that are existing that leaders are facing today? And we definitely talked about one of them, that being the training of new leaders. But what are some of the other areas that you feel that leaders need to be working on, whether they are on a national or an international platform, in terms of being effective leaders?
Wow. We got 3 hours. I need 2 hours to think of the answer and then 1 hour to talk about it. I would say on a corporate basis, because that's where my focus is on, is that well-being in the workplace. It's understanding the pressure we put people on when we send emails at 10 o'clock at night, even though we say we don't expect them to react to it. But just think of this. If I'm your boss and I send you an email at 10 o'clock at night or a text message, and you look at it on your phone, now you're spending quality time with your loved ones, hopefully at 10 o'clock at night. And then, maybe you're in a great conversation with one of your family members or a friend or whatever. And now you stop and you look at this email, and your brain, which again can only focus on one thing, is now thinking about work. And your significant other or loved one is going like, why is that so important? Why aren't you paying attention to me? Why at 10 o'clock at night are you now focused somewhere else? And imagine the cumulative strain of that on a relationship, day after day, week after week, month after month. I think that's where leaders need to step back and understand what those kind of pressures that we're putting people on, even though we don't expect them to respond to it. But the fact that we send it to them and they're reading it is putting them under pressure. And that's not good. That's not harmony. We're not helping people get harmony in their lives when we do things like that.
Yeah, we're definitely not doing that and everything along those lines. I'm definitely going to see if Nick and Jacoby, and I think Sasha is nearby as well, have any questions for you. I was going to throw in something that was a little bit more lighthearted, because it definitely has some serious questions around leadership and what you are doing, even with the harmony leadership mindset and all along those lines. But I just heard recently, and this could be something I guess leaders will have to deal with, but there are futures that are out there. And one of those futurists just recently came out and said that if we can just hold on for 7 years, we can all live a life of immortality, because he has apparently had some very high success rate and all along those lines. So if we're going to have people that are going to be around for hundreds, if not thousands of years, won't that raise all kinds of new leadership problems and everything? Because I'm going like, some people know that there is a beginning and there will be an end. That's kind of the nature of human life. But this particular futurist is out there claiming that we can hold on for 7 years, we can stick around forever, because he's making this prediction. And apparently he's had some high success rate, I think like 92% success rate. And I'm guessing he's talking about that whole nanotechnology and a number of other things that are going on in that space. But I know a lot of folks that are saying, like, with the world that we live in, I don't know if I want to live to be 1,000 or 2,000 or along those lines. But
no, and I'm not even sure if I live to be 150. I certainly don't want to be spending 110 of those 150 years in the workplace. So maybe as a society, we need to figure that out also, as to what other opportunities are there for people where, it's bad enough now that we're seeing 60-year-olds and 70-year-olds in the workplace because they need to economically. I mean, it's great for their brains. It's great for them if that's their choice. But can you imagine being, working at 120 years of age for a company? The other thing is, I think from an organizational standpoint to understand is, how bad is it now when you're a 35-year-old and your boss is 45 years old? Your boss is going to work for another 15 years. That means you may not get promoted for another 15 years. There's going to be one, say, chief human resource officer in your company. And if your chief human resource officer is 45 and you work for her or him at 35, they may stay in the company another 15 years. That kind of blocks your career path. So imagine if they work until they're 100 years old. How long is your career path being blocked?
Yeah, that's a good point and everything. On that same line, and then, like I said, I'll open it up to others on the panel as well. I do know that there have been cases in leadership, and you kind of alluded to it earlier, where there's that micro and the macro managing. And I know that I have been in jobs where I felt that the people enjoyed being the big fish in the small pond. They might have been fellow minorities, they might have been whatever, and they sometimes did not do effective leadership, or maybe it was effective leadership for them because they were trying to block the path of those that were in the succession line, or that might be coming up, because, like I said, they were enjoying being the big fish in the small pond. So I was wondering, is that something that you have run across in your leadership training, and how do you deal with that? And then what advice do you give to people that are running into those environments?
Well, Mark, I think part of that is organizational structures. When you have an organization, I worked for a major U.S. bank for many years, and we had force rankings. And so if I'm being evaluated against, I was a vice president of marketing, if I'm being evaluated against all the other vice presidents, how cooperative am I going to be? Particularly at the end of the year, when like right now in October, and the ranking systems happen in December. I want to make sure I get my bonus. I want to make sure I'm at the top of the bonus pool. So I may be less cooperative with you. I may withhold information with you. So we're setting up competition with our colleagues instead of just competition with our competitors, with other firms. So I think that's one thing organizations need to take a hard look at, is what organizational structures are in place that are fostering such competition between employees rather than collaboration, which would lead to greater innovation amongst employees. I think that's one place to certainly start.
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense and everything. What does it feel like when you get some of these rankings? Because I was looking at some of these rankings of yours, and I was wondering if that is something that you take a great deal of pride in, or if it's just something that you just are like, hey, it's just another title, another one of those rankings. Because I do know that in 2023, you were named as one of the top 200 global biggest voices in leadership by the Leadership Network, and the recognition of a lot of your work. And I've also seen that you were named in the 2023 Creed list of top entrepreneurs, influential leaders, and innovators for the thought leadership and writing that you do and everything. So I just wondered, as a leader, what is your thoughts around that? Because I know that even here and on LinkedIn, I've sometimes been labeled as an influencer, and I'm going like, well, I'm not sure who I'm supposed to be influencing, and I don't always know that I like that term and everything along those lines. But you have got a lot of these kind of rankings, and you are, like I said, you've got 22 leadership, business, and professional development books. I'm going like, this is a whole lot of books that are in this space and everything.
Well, I'm a human being, and yeah, I take a lot of pride in that. Obviously, I don't try to boast about it too much. I try and remain a little bit humble, but it's nice to be recognized by your peers in the industry. I mean, particularly in my case, the gold medal for the Human Leadership book from the Nonfiction Authors Association, because those are my peers who are also authors, writers of nonfiction books, and so yeah, I take pride in that. I hope that it tells people that what I have to say is maybe worth listening to or worth reading, but more importantly, it's worth reflecting upon and thinking about how can you take some of my thoughts on leadership and apply them to yourself in your workplace and modify them for making it work for you. So, yeah, I mean, the recognition is wonderful. There's, like I said, I'm a human being. It's nice to be recognized, but to me, it's more important that the readers not just take what I say, but reflect on what I say and what I write. That's to me is the key thing.
Yeah, and part of what you have done is you have definitely had some leadership roles and some jobs that are in other countries. We actually have on this panel sometimes even here today a gentleman from Australia, and I did see that you worked in Australia for 12 years, and you've also worked in Singapore for about 21 years. So, what are some of the lessons that you learned about leadership from some of the other countries? Because Pod TV is an international platform, so I was just wondering some of the things that you have learned about leadership that might be different in other parts of the world versus here.
The key thing is that there are differences, and as a leader, you need to respect those differences. I'll give you one quick example. Here in North America, it's okay to praise somebody in public. I can say to Nick, for instance, Nick, you did a great job on that project. I really love the way you led the team. But if you were in like Thailand, for instance, somebody in Thailand would kind of say, no, it wasn't me. It was a team. It was the team did it together. They're a more collective society. They don't want to be praised and singled out in public. Whereas, here in North America, most people are comfortable, not everybody, but most people be comfortable receiving praise in front of their team members and their peers and what have you. So it's those kind of things that leaders need to take into consideration. And again, that's when I talk about being people-centric, understanding that people are different. The other aspect is you have to lead people differently. Some people need more hands-on leadership, more mentoring and coaching. Others, you can, give them the vision, the outcome, say, this is what success looks like. This is the goals we want this project to achieve. And you don't abandon them, but you don't need to monitor them as closely as others. And so the leaders have to adapt their style to the people they're leading. When I first started working in the 1970s, it was the leader's way or the highway. You as an employee had to adapt to the leader. And if you didn't like the way the leader did stuff, well, time for you to find another job, another organization to work for. Here, I think the leader needs to adapt. And that's going to be difficult. And it's difficult particularly for, those of us who are baby boomers, those of us who are a few years past 45 or even 50 to make that adaptation. But this is where I think leaders need to adapt today to be successful long term.
Yep, definitely can see that and everything. Definitely, Nick and Jacoby and even Sasha, if you have any questions for Mr. Howard and all along those lines, like I said, we're talking about leadership on this particular segment and everything. So if there's any thoughts or questions, like I said, he's definitely had a long-ranging history and has definitely had some tremendous success in this space. So I turn it over to you if you have any questions.
Stephen, I would like to ask you, first of all, it's a great career that you had for yourself and writing books and being in demand as a speaker. I would like to ask you if you would agree that, say, out of 100% of workforce, there's probably 5% are born leaders who will be leaders regardless of coaching, of suggestions. They will be leaders, period. There is probably the same 5% who will never, ever be leaders, regardless of coaching and advice and so on. So basically, I think your strong point is 90% of people who could be leaders but are not, but maybe leaders or not. And this 90%, it's a formidable figure. So if this 90%, forget about the 5% on the top and 5% at the bottom, they probably don't need anything for different reasons, but essentially. Now, what I would be interested is that this 90% that you could be very, very useful, if you could come with the concept of corporate survival skills. I think it's much more important for today's America to find out how to survive. Forget about leadership. The leadership, those who born leaders, they will be leaders. The owners of the company will be leaders. The major shareholders will be leaders. You will not be able to empower, maybe in some rare exception, somebody extremely talented. He was not born leader, but through coaching, through determination, through good habits, he climbed himself into leadership position. I don't think he will be stay there long enough even to bear the fruits. But survival in today's America, this is what's useful for this 90%, because 5% are going to be leaders regardless, 5% are hopeless losers that you don't need to spend your time on, but 90% for them to survive is much more important than dream about becoming leaders. Would you agree with me?
Yes and no, Sasha. I think whether it's I'm not talking about the numbers here. My concept of leadership is anybody who leads people. So it's not just senior vice presidents and the C-suite. It's the supervisor. It's the team leader. It's the frontline manager is also a leader because they're leading people, and they're the ones that've got to get things done. They have to, often say that middle managers are the glue between strategy and execution. Strategy comes down from on high, but it gets executed at the front lines. But middle managers are leaders. They're the ones who have to lead the execution of that strategy and have to lead those people. The reason I agree with you in some point that some people are not ever going to be leaders, quite frankly, the other aspect of this, some people never want to be a leader. I've worked so much in the oil and gas industry, and I know chemical engineers and research scientists who are they're happy being individual contributors. All they want to do is be in their laboratories and do their experiments and write up their reports and try and be innovative. They never want to lead people. That's fine. I think one of the worst mistakes we often make, in particularly business, is that we promote people in leadership who don't want to be leaders. They don't want to lead people. Because look, people are messy. Leading people is not easy. The leadership is complex. It doesn't need to be complicated, but it is a complex thing, and not everyone wants to be a leader. And also I've seen so many times, particularly in my area, marketing and sales, my functional area, how many times have I seen a great salesperson, person who leads the team in sales, tops their goals every year, suddenly becomes a sales manager. And they're terrible because they don't know how to lead people, and they don't know how to teach people how to sell. They only know the way that they're good at selling. And, selling is a great skill. But the way I sell and the way you sell, Sasha, might be two different ways. And you can't sell like I do. And if I'm your leader, I can't force you to sell the way I do. And that's why sometimes great salespeople make absolutely terrible sales leaders.
That makes a lot of sense. Hey, just out of curiosity, because I didn't know that part about your history and everything, what is one of the greatest things you learned about leadership? Because I know that there have even been people that have come from leadership in the oil and gas industry. So I was wondering, what are some of the lessons you learned about leadership from that particular industry? Because I know that there was a former president. It's actually one that Sasha's not a big fan of and all along those lines, but the Bush family definitely came from that kind of a background and all along those lines. So I was just wondering, what is something that you learned as a leadership tactic or that leadership qualities from that particular industry? Because that is an industry that has been fantasized about for a number of years. I'm thinking about the old TV series Dallas and all along those lines. But I was just wondering, what are some of the leadership qualities you learned from that particular industry?
Not just with that industry, Mark, but across all industries. One of the things I think I've learned most about leadership is that it's not about me as the leader. It's about the people I'm leading. And if that's part of the mindset. If I can have that mindset, put that ego aside, and particularly in today's world, one thing about leaders today, leaders cannot have all the answers. And that's one thing I've noticed in the oil and gas industry, the financial service industries, the legal industry, is that leaders today understand that they can't have all the answers. They can't know about everything. They have to be humble enough, be authentic enough, be open enough to say, hey, team, I'm not sure what the right answer is, but I believe in us as a team, as an organization, that we will find the right answer. I remember, just as an aside, many, many years ago, Continental Airlines, when it was having huge financial issues, the CEO of Continental Airlines at the time called an all-hands-on meeting in Houston and said, was very open and honest with people about the financial difficulties the airline was facing. And then he said, I want all of you to pray for the airline, pray for us. Well, praying is not necessarily a great leadership strategy. It's important to do in our lives. And he was shortly replaced. And then Continental had to sell itself to United Airlines many years ago. And they kind of formed together, and Continental is gone. Most of the people are gone from Continental. So it's that ability to be open and honest, but also to say, look, I don't have the answer, but I trust us to find the answer. Not that I trust us to pray for the answer. I trust us as a team. We will together find a solution. We will find some opportunities to move our company forward.
Yeah. What do you think that employees want today? And then I think there was another question that was out there as well. But what do you think employees want today in their work environment?
I think they want to be trusted. A leader who comes into a team, say you get transferred from one part of your organization to another, you get hired from the outside and you bring in. I've seen so many leaders come in and say, okay, here's how you earn my trust. Excuse me? Wait a second. Why do I need to earn your trust? So I coach leaders now to walk into teams and say, I trust you. Here's how you can lose my trust. You can not come to me with a problem. You can lie. You can try to hide a mistake, try and bury it under the carpet. You can blame others, shame and blame. You cannot take responsibility. That's how you can lose my trust. Because I think people want to be trusted. They want to be empowered. That, most importantly, I think they want to develop their skills, particularly the younger generation. So many people have left. Part of the Great Resignation causes where people left organizations because they didn't feel like there was a growth opportunity anymore. They wanted to go to a company that would develop them, that would grow them, give them challenges. People do want to grow. And going back to Sasha's numbers, look, there's always going to be 5, 6, 7% of your workforce that can't be trusted. And that's part of the work from home issue right now. People want to, if they're working from home, how do we know they're really working? We're going to monitor their keystrokes. Well, yeah, look, there may be 5, 6, 7% of people are going to skive a little bit. They're going to watch a TV show instead of be working, but they may get their job done anyway in other hours. But even if they don't, do you want to focus your leadership? Do you want to focus your policies on that 5, 6, 7%? Or do you want to focus it on the 93, 94, 95% of your workers who will show up, who will get things done, who will bring you ideas because they want to grow? It's your choice.
Yep, definitely. Nick or Toby, any other questions?
I have a question. What about this is something you brought up earlier in today's program, but it's bothered me and also David Walker, who does our Monday show. He's the former Comptroller General of the United States, and we've had Larry Robertson on. I don't know if you know him. He writes extensively on leadership. But here's the problem that we see as leaders in politics. It doesn't seem to me that the political party, and I'm going to pick on the Democratic Party, grooms leaders at all. In other words, it seems to me it's a top-down, follow the saver approach and follow Biden into the abyss no matter what. And if you say, okay, let's say Biden is not a choice, there's no grooming for anybody else. And so you have this octogenarian who's running for election, and the Democratic Party is doing no good at bringing people on. But it's not just at that level. It seems like the whole political party is done that way. And so what you have is what I call a dumbing down or a delusional party that exists. The Democratic Party is very delusional right now. But I see that in politics everywhere, even in the Republican Party. At least they're having a debate, trying to bring up new leaders. But what David Walker said, and I agree, there's a leadership vacuum in Washington, D.C. We don't really have effective leaders. We don't have a plan. In other words, what's the U.S.'s strategic plan over the next 5 years? Instead, we just have chaos, which we're seeing right now with the government shutdown. We have chaos. They can't even elect a leader. That's how bad it is, you know? So what would you say, because I think they need a lot of leadership coaching, what would you say about our horrible two-party system and the horrible leaders it doesn't produce? If you go to football, they produce good quarterbacks, good leaders. They have a training system called college football, high school, middle school, and all up you go. If you go to politics, you have chaos. You have people at the top who quash the people below. It's just the worst of America. And what do you have to say about leadership in politics?
Well, the vacuum is absolutely correct. And I think it's been going on for maybe 30 or 40 years. And one thing you don't know about me, Nick, is I majored in political science in college. I actually had ambitions of spending a career in politics and government when I was a late teenager, early 20s. You know what? I think in this part of the problem, the root cause of what you're talking about is that the best and brightest no longer go to work in Washington. So it's not just the elected officials, it's the entire infrastructure, the bureaucracy. I mean, you know, in John Kennedy's days, you know, before that, Eisenhower's days and Truman, the top brains from Harvard and Cornell and Yale would go to work in Washington. For many years, and you had the smartest people. Now they go to work in Silicon Valley, or they go to work in Wall Street. And so, one, I don't think we have the brain talent in Washington, and we haven't had, I would argue, personally, since probably the 1970s. So that's 50 years. I think that's number one. Number two, I take your analogy about sports. It's not just a quarterback. I mean, you look at a leader like Nick Saban at the University of, what's he at, Alabama.
Yeah.
It's not just that he develops his players, he develops his coaches. How many people from his coaching staff have gone on to become senior coaches, whether it's the head coach or the offensive coordinator, defense coordinator at other schools? You know, so when you add a leader like somebody like a Nick Saban, who develops not just the talent, the employee talent, so to speak, the players or the employees, but who develops the leadership talent, that's what's so critical. Jack Welch was good at this. I mean, I can fault Jack Welch for many things at GE, but one of the things that Jack Welch did is he developed his leadership talent. How many people left GE to go and run other successful organizations around the country? So we don't have that in politics, and it's not just federal; it's a state level. I mean, how many times does lieutenant governor ever become governor? How many times does the senior person in a state capitol on either the Senate or House side become lieutenant governor and then work their way up? I don't have the answer to you. I can tell you some of the issues around it, but I totally agree with you. There is a vacuum of leadership, and not just in this country, around the world. And you saw that the way politicians around the world reacted to COVID. And other than the lady in New Zealand who unfortunately resigned a few years ago, but other than her and a couple other great examples, I don't think any leaders around the world really handled COVID very well.
Yeah, David Halberstam actually wrote a book called The Best and the Brightest. I don't know if you read that book. It was about the JFK administration and the whole theory of Kennedy, and the book The Best and the Brightest was to bring in the best and the brightest into Washington, D.C. When Trump got elected, I started to think he's going to do the same thing. He brought in the head of ExxonMobil. He brought in the head of Amway. He brought in a lot of people I thought were really good. But because of his personality, and I'm talking about Trump's personality, no one could stand him, and he couldn't stand other people. And it would be a revolving circus door, which is what took place, which is not the hallmark of an effective leader. So as you go through that, I keep thinking, really, is Trump and Biden the best our country can do? I don't think so. And this really bothers me because it's a big part of our economy, and you got two really poor candidates right now.
Anik, I would like to suggest something to you about about the leadership in Democratic Party. You're talking about Joe Biden. Remember,
Right.
Joe Biden was already senator around 50 or 150 years ago. Nobody remembers when he was.
Understood. Yeah, he's been in the Senate for
Nobody
100 years.
knows any. But let me ask you, Nick, who do you think groomed Joe Biden to become eventually president of the United States? He was going through rank and files. He was
Right.
climbing the stairs. He became the vice president to Obama while he was older than Obama, evidently. And he did that, and then finally he became president of the United States. Nobody prepared him for that role. Nobody
he's-
groomed him.
he's
He was
not-
going through all the natural style.
He spent 8
So-
years under Obama as vice president. I mean, the 8 years he spent with Obama and vice president helped him into the position. But Bloomberg was so worried about this guy as a candidate. He ran only because he thought Biden was just weak. And if you look at his history, he is weak. I mean, you know, he was never
No,
going
no,
to
I think Toby had
do
something
well
to
in
add.
Boston. I mean, his whole
I think-
history is the guy is like he's like what I call a bottom fisher. And
Well-
now there's a lot of top people, but he's not one of them. And because of that, you're going to see you might see Trump taking the presidency off of default because you're bringing an octogenarian. You
I
know?
think what you're doing, Nick, you're being unfair calling Biden an octogenarian, but not Trump an octogenarian.
Because
They're
he's
3
not.
years apart. And then on top of that, I
it doesn't
think we're
matter.
thinking
One's
politics.
80 and one's in his 70s. So I'm
One's
not
81, 77, going on 78.
Sure.
You're acting as if they're completely different ages. They're basically the same
That's
age.
right. One's actually younger than the other.
They're the same age, Nick. Come
No,
on
they're-
now.
Come on.
Both can sit in
Three-
the same
Well,
retirement
listen,
community.
any
Both can
action
sit in the
knows
same rest home.
you hit age
They're
90,
the same with
the
bedpan.
odds of you
So
going to
you're
age
saying
90
they're completely different. Also, another problem that you're having when you're talking about, and I think this is where we get confused, and Stephen, you can help me out on this, is that politics is more about social influence and leadership, and that social influence and that influential part, we're looking for somebody to inspire us in politics more so today than to actually lead us. Obama's big thing was that he inspired people to vote, and they went out to vote then. Biden doesn't inspire us. He could be a great leader, but he doesn't have that inspirational piece that pushes us out to go to the polls. And that's what people complain about. It's not that he's weak. It's not that he's a poor leader. It's that he just doesn't have that inspirational piece, which is influence, that social influence piece. And that's where politics is different. Grooming people is going to be tough in politics. And also, you're talking about, Nick, one of the things historically, I guess, Stephen, you can also, being the poli-sci major, the incumbent president usually doesn't have the debates and everything else in our history. For example, Trump didn't really have the debates, but Biden did. Obama didn't have the debates, but who ran against Obama? McCain did. When Bush was coming up on his next 4 years, he didn't have the debates. It was Kerry who had the debates. So it was all. So the incumbent president usually doesn't go through that primary process. But for some odd reason, we have forgotten that. And that's why Biden is running into this whole incumbent piece more so than, hey, we need to groom somebody and throw somebody new in. Historically, that's not happened. That's never really happened.
Yeah,
We've
it's
never had a primary process for an incumbent president.
Thanks to Toby, you brought up what I call a systemic defect in our political system. Thank you.
But you're complaining that
Every
is
other position in the world is
happened.
competitive.
That is something that has happened.
You know, you just don't anoint King Biden. Every other position
It's
I've been involved
historical
in is
process.
Hold on a second. I definitely wanted to hear Stephen's thoughts around that. I was actually also going to ask him really quickly as we can go a little bit over, but not too much over and everything. Yeah, go ahead, Jacoby.
Oh, my question was, Stephen, in discussing in leadership, how can influencers, because there's a lot of influencers on, from YouTube to Twitch to, all throughout, that are out there, from TikTok influencers. How can those influencers make that shift to understand that they are leaders as well?
They're leaders of influence. They're not leaders of people necessarily. But Nick's right. There is a systemic issue here, and that systemic issue partly is that politics is different than governance, and electing politicians to lead the executive branch of a government. I think you'll find that historically, people like Ronald Reagan, Richard Nixon, were extremely strong presidents because they were governors previously. They had learned how to lead the executive branches of a state. So I'm not sure Nixon was a governor. I can't remember anymore now. But that doesn't guarantee it, because Jimmy Carter was a governor and he became president, and he was a fairly weak president in certain areas. So, but leadership is about leading people, and politics is about influence. It's about popularity. And so this dichotomy between getting elected to the executive branch and then trying to lead the executive branch. And, you're right, Nick, in that, the CEO of ExxonMobil was brought in, but he was not a great leader. He led an organization that had so much money that any mistake they made, they could cover it up. They weren't necessarily a great ethical leadership. As we're finding out with what they've done with climate change. And so he was more of an influence. Yes, he knew a lot of people internationally, but he was not a good executive of the State Department.
Stephen,
You had Trump, who is more of a hands-on manager, not a leader, but a hands-on manager who didn't let him run the State Department either. He interfered so much. So.
Stephen, here is something about Trump I wanted to clarify it with you. With the wealth of his life experience, being a business leader, being an entertainer star, being just in all kinds of roles, what happened that he couldn't become a great leader?
Ego. The lack of humbleness, number one, I would suggest. Number two, he's more of a micromanager, hands-on. I mean, as you'll find many people. I mean, Elon Musk, he can make a lot of money, but I'm not sure you want him as president of the United States. So I'm not sure you want him heading like even Twitter, because he's too hands-on. He doesn't delegate. He doesn't hire the best and brightest to run his organizations. I think Trump's the same thing. He not strong in hiring. Notice that everyone that Mr. Trump hired and then left suddenly became, that person was no good. That person was inadequate. Well, excuse me, you're the one who hired all these people. Maybe the fault lies with your decision on who you're hiring, not necessarily the quality of the people that you're hiring.
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense. I know we're going to wind down really quickly and everything, but you actually alluded to somebody. We've talked about him on the news and everything. What is it about Elon Musk that you think doesn't make him an effective leader? You kind of maybe alluded to it, but I'm just wondering, because a lot of people will try to paint him along with maybe Mark Aguirre, who is I think that's saying the name right, but the one that is the head of the Mavericks and has some business interests, as well as being great leaders and all along those lines. But definitely, what do you see are some of the weaknesses of Elon Musk as a leader? Because a lot of people will point to him, as well as Jack Dorsey and others, as being these great leaders.
Yeah, Elon Musk, again, the ego, the micromanaging, the off-the-cuff decision. Look at Mark Cuban. Mark Cuban, thank you. Mark Aguirre was their point guard, I think, but Mark Cuban.
That's what I'm trying to think of.
Look what happened there. That organization had a major cultural problem around sexual harassment, around harassment of minorities. What did Mark Cuban do? He took accountability for that situation, and he went out and hired a woman, a very strong African-American woman. I don't think it mattered that she's African-American, but she had a strong background. And he stepped back. And she is, I think, the CEO designation, but she has changed the culture of that organization and gone in and said, these kind of things are not tolerable. We will not put up with this anymore. And here's the direction we're going to go. Now she delegates to her senior leaders to implement that new direction. So Mark Cuban is smart enough to know what he doesn't know. I don't think Elon Musk is smart enough to know what he doesn't know sometimes. Elon Musk is the old style manager who has to have all the answers. Mark Cuban's smart enough to say, you know what? I don't know how to fix this problem. I'm a wealthy billionaire, middle-aged white guy. I don't understand how to change the culture of this organization. I'm going to go out and find somebody. In fact, they found a woman was nice, but he went out and found somebody to go fix his problem. That to me is the difference between a great leader and egocentric leader.
Two other quick questions, everything that we will definitely end at everything, but should leaders speak out on social issues and everything along those lines? Because that is definitely a conversation we saw doing Black Lives Matter, doing LGBTQI rates and a number of other things. But I was just wondering, in your mind, should leaders use their bully pulpit to speak out on social issues?
This is why leadership is an art, Mark. I don't have Harry Potter's magic wand. I can't answer that for everybody. I think leaders have to make that decision for their organizations, what's best for their organization and the people. You know, I always like Howard Schultz's philosophy of leadership in that my people are my first priority, my customers are my second priority, and my shareholders are my third priority. And so if you're willing to have that attitude and figure out what's best for your employees and then your customers, you speak out. Unfortunately, we're in a very divisive country these days. So if you speak out on any issue, you're going to have 40% of the population probably agree with you. You're going to have 40% of the population who's now going to boycott your products. And you're going to have 20% of the population who just doesn't give a damn, quite frankly. So you're taking a risk of your organization if you lose 40% of your customers because you take a stand on any issue, gun control, the LBGQTA.
Remember Target Corporation? What's happened to them a few months ago?
Exactly. What happened to Target about bathrooms? There you go. So it's a risk. You have to make a risk assessment. Obviously, I hate to say that sometimes it's smarter to be quiet, but sometimes it is. And unfortunately, it's hard to separate yourself as a leader of an organization from your personal opinions. It's hard to say, okay, I'm Stephen Howard. I'm the CEO of my organization, but I'm Stephen Howard, a person. These are my personal beliefs. They're not my corporate beliefs, but people are going to, because of divisiveness in our society, people are going to react to it in that way.
No, that makes a lot of sense. Stephen, if you would just go ahead, Joey.
I was going to say, interestingly enough, Mark, in the African American community, this actually happened. Everybody was upset for Michael Jordan for not speaking up in social issues, but everybody was upset. Others were upset at LeBron James for speaking up on issues.
For speaking up, and exactly right. And and Michael has spoken up more recently as the CEO of the Hornets before he sold the organization. But, his attitude as a player was, I'm here to do my job. And I'm, LeBron spoken up.
If I remember, his quote was, even Republicans buy sneakers as well.
Exactly.
Mike
always knew what the bottom line was.
Yep.
He's definitely a bottom line kind of guy and everything. And I actually went to school with a gentleman that was very outspoken. I'll be interested to see whether he is outspoken now that he is going to be on the sportscasting side of things. But I did go to Marquette with Doc Rivers, and I remember Doc Rivers was very adamant around some of the issues around police violence and a number of other things when he was both coach there in Los Angeles as well as coach in Philadelphia. So he was definitely a outspoken critic of some of the things that were going on in society, and I thought that he handled it in a effective way.
And Greg Popovich, I think, does an excellent job. But again, Greg Popovich speaks for Greg Popovich. Nobody says this is what the Spurs believe. So he's strong enough leader, long enough tenure that Greg can speak out and share his opinion.
Yeah, and I think that's what Doc was doing as well. I don't remember him claiming that he was speaking for the entire 76ers, even though he did sometimes say that he would get some of his players to agree with him on some of the things, and they might have come out in agreement with him. But he never, as I recall, said that he was speaking for the 76ers organization or the Clippers organization during that time as well. And there was even some conflict with another leader, because I remember there was a whole conflict between him and the coach of the Clippers, I believe it was. And I think that you're in California, so you might have remembered some of that conversation and some of that things that was going on there. And some of that was around race relations and a number of other things. But we could definitely have a whole conversation about that. But I've thoroughly enjoyed our conversation today and all along those lines. If you could tell folks how they can reach you, get in touch with you, and hopefully we'll have you come back and share some more thoughts on leadership on another episode of either this show or some of our other shows. Who knows? We might even have you pop in on Modern Investment if Sasha decides to ever invite you or all along those lines. So he does Modern Investment on Mondays. I'm sorry, today on Wednesdays at 1:00 and everything. So definitely maybe
Mark.
we could have him.
Please send the link to Stephen if you'll have time.
Would
You
love
can-
to. Would
Okay.
love to. I'm on LinkedIn. I'm Stephen Howard. It says Greater Los Angeles area. It's a fairly common name, but you can find me there. Go to humanelyleadership.com or Stephen@humanelyleadership.com is my email. Reach out. I'm happy to discuss with anybody how to talk about these things in your organization. I'm happy to have a free conversation with anybody if I can help you think about ways of changing your leadership style, changing your leadership mindset. I'm here to help.
Sounds good. And I would definitely send you the link for Sasha's show at 1:00.
you,
And
Mark.
like I said, if you have time and everything, if you want to pop in, that's 1:00 Eastern Standard Time. So about another 2 hours. And if you have that time, then we would definitely send you the link. And if you're able to, definitely pop in.
Not today, but another day I'd be happy to. I've got a client engagement at that hour, but another time I'd be happy to.
Sounds good.
And
All right,
Jatovi,
that'd be
basketball starts in 2 weeks.
That is very true. That is very true. Preseason's going on right now.
It is. It's regular season is what counts.
Yep.
Exactly. Although watching Wembanyama was fun.
Watching what? Sorry.
Wembanyama for the Spurs.
Oh, yeah. I didn't see that, but I'm looking forward to the regular.
And Stephen, as we get ready to head out the door and everything, I think that you have a, by the way, Jatovi does some of the announcing on the field announcing for the Durham Bulls. And I want to say that your Dodgers aren't doing that bad and everything, because I want to say that they might be involved in what's going on with the playoffs and all along those lines.
That's a sore point, Mark. I'm a San Francisco Giants fan, so I always have been. So even though I live in Southern California, I'm not a Padres fan. I'm not a Dodgers fan. So thanks for shooting the arrow right here.
Sorry to do that to you and everything. Did not know. Now I know. So we'll keep that in
If
mind.
you're a San Francisco Giants fan, does that make you a Niners fan as well?
No, I don't follow football honestly that much. I was a Chicago Bears fan. I was born in Chicago. So as a kid, I was a big Dick Buckets fan as a teenage child, pre-teenage child. I'm 51 was one of my favorite numbers, and I know he passed away earlier this week. Always was a Chicago Bulls fan. So fortunately, in the Phil Jackson, Michael Jordan era, I was very happy with that. I am a Warriors fan today. I am a Giants fan in baseball. I don't follow the American football that much. So.
Yeah, that's
Yeah, but
okay. Though. I mean, with following the Warriors with Chris Paul, now it's a good thing.
That's a good thing. It's Steve Kerr. I'll follow. See, part of it, I follow the coaches too. I mean, I follow Phil Jackson. I follow Steve Kerr. I follow leaders, not just the players. So.
I follow some great
don't
leaders
have
and
ice
everything.
skate. I'm terrible. I don't like cold weather, Mark. I don't ski. I don't snowboard, and I certainly don't ice skate. So no, I don't follow hockey whatsoever.
Not followed hockey whatsoever. And on that note, we're going to get on out of here. But Stephen, it's been great having you as a guest, and look forward to having you back again in the near future.
My pleasure. Thank you, gentlemen. Nice talking with you.
Bye-bye.